I stood there in the doorway of her gleaming, ridiculously oversized kitchen, watching her. She was framed by a cathedral-sized window that looked out onto the Pacific Ocean, a glass of crisp white wine in her perfectly manicured hand. Her name was Candace, and she looked every bit the part of the Malibu Barbie she'd become. Blonde, impossibly thin for a woman in her 40s, and draped in cashmere that probably cost more than my first car. She turned, her smile faltering for just a second as she tried to place me. I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes, the quick mental Rolodex scan. Was I the new caterer, a stray from the homeowners association? Her brow furrowed with that perfectly balanced touch of Botox. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice smooth and cool, the kind of voice that's never had to raise itself to be heard. I took a certain pleasure in the moment, letting it stretch just a little too long before I answered. "Who are you?" she finally asked, a little more forcefully this time. I gave her a small, tight smile, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. "I'm Sarah, and I'm the one you and my husband stole $30 million from. If you are ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is." Now let me back up, because a story like this doesn't just happen overnight. It brews. It festers. It's a slow-growing cancer that you don't even know is there until one day you wake up and your entire world has been hollowed out. My world, for 42 years, had been Robert. We met in college, a classic story. He was the ambitious business major with a smile that could sell sand in the Sahara. And I was the art history student who fell for it hook, line, and sinker. We built a life together, the kind you see in magazines. Not flashy, not at first. We started with nothing in a tiny walk-up apartment in Chicago. He'd be up at dawn, fueled by black coffee and sheer determination, building his logistics company from the ground up. I was right there with him. I taught art at a local high school to keep us afloat in those early years, packed his lunches, typed his business plans late into the night, and celebrated every tiny victory with a bottle of cheap champagne. Robert's company, Trident Logistics, became our third child, after our two actual children, Michael and Jessica, were grown and gone. It was our baby. I named it, for goodness sake. Robert was the face, the deal maker, but I was the foundation, the sounding board, the one who remembered the names of his clients' wives and kids, who planned the company dinners that made everyone feel like family, who convinced him not to sell when things got tough in the early 2000s. Our lives were woven together so tightly, I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. The money came slowly at first, and then all at once. By the time Robert was 65 and I was 62, Trident was a major player in national shipping. We weren't just comfortable, we were wealthy. We had a beautiful home in a leafy suburb, a condo in Florida for the winter, and the freedom to do whatever we wanted. Robert was supposed to be stepping back, easing into retirement. We were gonna travel. I had a list: the Danube, the coast of Italy, a safari in Tanzania. We were supposed to grow old together, content and secure, surrounded by the fruits of our shared labor. That was the plan. The first crack in the foundation appeared about 3 years ago. It wasn't a big dramatic shatter. It was subtle. A new executive assistant for Robert, Candace. She was 25 years younger than me, with teeth as white as porcelain, and a business degree from a school I'd never heard of. She was supposed to be helping Robert wind down his portfolio and manage his transition into retirement. That's what he told me anyway. "She's a real whiz, Sarah," he'd said, beaming. A real go-getter. Reminds me of me back in the day. I'm not a jealous woman, or at least I never thought I was, but there was something about her that set my teeth on edge. The way she'd look at him during company events, a little too much adoration in her eyes. The way she'd laugh a little too loudly at his jokes. The late nights at the office started becoming more frequent. When I'd call, he'd answer, but he always sounded breathless, distracted. Just finalizing the quarterlies, hun. Candace is a lifesaver. We're buried in paperwork.
I tried to tell myself I was being silly, a stereotype of the aging wife, paranoid and insecure. I was in my 60s, for heaven's sake. I had a good life. I trusted my husband. Didn't I? Our friends noticed it too, in their own polite, suburban way. Robert seems reinvigorated, my best friend Linda said over lunch one day, carefully choosing her words. What she meant was Robert's acting like a fool. He'd started dyeing his hair, badly. He bought a cherry red convertible sports car that he could barely get in and out of. He started using phrases like crushing it and game changer. It was a midlife crisis cliche, and frankly, it was embarrassing. But I still didn't see the whole picture. I thought it was just a phase, a man terrified of getting old. I had no idea it was a hostile takeover. The real bomb dropped on a Tuesday. I remember the weather was gray and miserable, the kind of day that seeps into your bones. Robert came home from a business trip to Miami, a trip Candace had also been on, and asked for a divorce. Just like that. After 42 years, over a plate of reheated lasagna I had saved for him. "I'm not happy, Sarah," he said, staring at a spot on the wall just over my shoulder. "I haven't been happy for a long time. I need to live my own life." I was stunned. It felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. 42 years of marriage, 2 kids, a whole life built together. And it was over in a 30-second speech. Of course I fought it. I cried, I yelled, I begged. I asked him what I did wrong. I asked if we could try counseling. He just shook his head. His face a cold, unfamiliar mask. "It's too late," he said. "My mind is made up." The divorce was fast and brutal. Robert had the best lawyers money could buy, of course. He argued that the company was his. His name was on the letterhead, his ideas, his work. He painted me as a simple housewife who had enjoyed the benefits, but had never contributed a single meaningful thing to Trident's success. My name wasn't on the founding documents. I hadn't been in the pitch meetings. The stories I could tell, the all-nighters, the sacrifices, the times I propped him up when he was ready to quit. They were just stories. They weren't legal documents. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. He offered me a settlement. It sounded generous to an outsider, the house, which was paid off, and an allowance that he called more than fair. But I knew what Trident was worth. I'd seen the quarterly reports over the years. We were worth a fortune. The offer was a pittance, an insult. It was just enough to keep me quiet and comfortable, to make him look like a magnanimous ex-husband to his friends and our children. My kids, God bless them, were torn. They loved their father, but they couldn't believe what he was doing. They tried to talk to him, but he shut them down. "It's between your mother and me," he'd say. "Stay out of it." His lawyers were sharks. They buried mine in paperwork, in motions and depositions. They dragged up every little thing to make me look incompetent. That time I bounced a check in 1988, my preference for art history over balance sheets. They painted a picture of me as a flighty, coddled woman who didn't understand the complexities of the modern business world. And Robert, The man I had loved and supported for over 4 decades sat there and let them do it. He wouldn't even look me in the eye. Candace, naturally, was promoted from executive assistant to chief operating officer. Her face was suddenly in business magazines. They were profiled as the dynamic duo revitalizing a legacy brand. The photos made me physically ill. There she was, sitting in the office I helped decorate next to the man I had built from nothing, wearing a smug smile and a power suit. I ended up taking the settlement. My lawyer, a good man, but completely outgunned, told me it was the best I could hope for. He said fighting it would drain what little I had left, and the chances of a judge seeing my decades of unpaid, unrecognized labor as equal contribution were slim to none. So I signed the papers. I felt defeated. A 63-year-old divorcee with a nice house and a broken heart. Robert and Candace probably thought that was the end of it. They could ride off into the sunset in their stupid red convertible, and I would just fade away. They had no idea that while they were celebrating, I was in my basement, late at night, digging. The basement was Robert's domain, the one place I never really touched. It was a chaotic archive of our lives together. Old photo albums, the kids' school projects, and 40-plus years of paperwork. Robert wasn't exactly what you'd call an organized man. He was a classic piler. He never threw anything away, just shoved it into a box and tossed it downstairs. Financial statements, old tax returns, bank records, partnership agreements from the 80s, it was all there. His lawyers had requested and received all the official corporate records from the past 7 years, but they never asked for the boxes of dusty, forgotten papers from the decades before. They never asked for the history. Robert probably forgot it was even there.
I spent months down there. Night after night, with a pot of coffee and a reading lamp, I went through every single piece of paper. It was like an archaeological dig of my own marriage. I found old napkins with business ideas sketched on them in my handwriting. I found letters from the bank denying our first business loan, letters that brought back the sting of that early rejection like it was yesterday. And then, in a dusty accordion file labeled MISC 1994, I found it. The thing they had forgotten. The thing that was about to change everything. It was a single, folded piece of legal-sized paper, yellowed with age, tucked inside an old envelope from a bank that hadn't existed for 20 years. The document itself was unremarkable to look at, a standard boilerplate articles of incorporation for a small S-corp. The company name was S&R Services, our initials. I had forgotten all about that. This was before Trident Logistics, before the big branding consultants. This was the primordial seed of the entire empire. I scanned the familiar details. Robert's signature, bold and loopy, the date, April 14th, 1994, and then my eyes landed on the section listing the corporate officers and stakeholders. President, Robert Gable. Vice President, Robert Gable. Secretary, Robert Gable. He always did love to see his name in print. But below that, under initial stock distribution, were 2 lines. Robert Gable, 450 shares. Sarah Gable, 50 shares. 50 shares, 10%. I sank back on the dusty floor, my heart pounding in my ears. I remembered it now. It came back to me in a flash. We needed $5,000 for a down payment on our first real delivery van. The banks had laughed at us. Robert's credit was shot from a failed venture right after college. Mine was clean, but I was a teacher. I didn't have any capital. So I'd gone to my father. Dad was a pragmatic man, a tool and die maker his whole life. He believed in tangible things, not risky business ideas. But he believed in me. He gave me the $5,000 drawn from his retirement savings. It wasn't a loan for Robert. He made that very clear. It was a gift to me, an investment in my future. To make it official, to protect my interest, he insisted I be listed as a 10% owner in the original company charter.
Robert had grumbled about it, but he needed the money, so he agreed. We signed the papers in a little desk in a stuffy law office, and then we just forgot. A few years later, when the business really started taking off, Robert's fancy new accountants restructured everything. S&R Services was dissolved and rolled into the new, grander entity, Trident Logistics. In all the excitement and the mountains of new paperwork, that original 10% was just lost in the shuffle. Robert never mentioned it again, and I, buried in raising the kids and supporting his dream, let it slip from my mind completely. He didn't steal that 10%, he just buried it, assuming it would never see the light of day again. It was a footnote in a story he had completely rewritten with himself as the sole author. For a moment, I felt a rush of white-hot anger that almost made me dizzy. This wasn't just sweat equity that the courts couldn't recognize. This was black and white. My name on a legal document, my father's legacy, my stake. Robert hadn't just erased me from our present, he had tried to erase me from our past. But anger doesn't get you very far. Action does. The next morning, I did not call the lawyer who had handled my divorce. He was a nice man, but he was a gentle family lawyer from the suburbs. I needed a shark, and I knew that in the world of high-stakes corporate law, sharks aren't cheap. For the first time, I looked at the generous settlement Robert had given me, not as a consolation prize, but as a war chest. I spent a week doing research. I went to the city law library, a place I hadn't been in 40 years, and I looked up top corporate litigation firms. I made a list of names, cross-referenced them with legal journals, and looked for specialists in corporate governance and forensic accounting. I was looking for someone young, someone hungry, someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Robert's high-priced legal team. I found her in a boutique firm downtown. Her name was Evelyn Reed. Her online profile picture showed a woman in her late 30s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut. Her bio was a string of impressive victories against massive corporations. She specialized in complex business disputes and shareholder rights. She sounded perfect and expensive. I called her office and made an appointment, simply stating that I had a question about an old business document. I showed up dressed not as a wronged ex-wife, but as a potential client. I wore my best suit, had my hair done, and carried a leather briefcase. Inside was one thing: a certified copy of the incorporation document from 1994. Evelyn's office was sleek and modern, all glass and steel. She didn't keep me waiting. She walked in, shook my hand firmly, and got right down to business. "Mrs. Gable, thank you for coming in. What can I help you with?"
I took the copy of the document from my briefcase and slid it across the glass table. "My name is Sarah Gable," I said, my voice steady, "and I believe I am a 10% silent partner in Trident Logistics." She picked it up, her eyes scanning the page. She was silent for what felt like an eternity. I watched her face, looking for any hint of dismissal. She read it once. Then she read it again more slowly. Finally, she looked up at me, and for the first time I saw a flicker of something other than professional politeness in her eyes. It was intrigue. "This is the original charter for S&R Services?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "And this entity was later restructured into Trident Logistics?" "That's right, around 1998. And this initial stock distribution was never bought out, renegotiated, or otherwise superseded in a legally binding way that you signed off on?" I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "Not that I can recall, and certainly not in a way that I was ever paid for." Evelyn leaned back in her chair, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Mrs. Gable," she said, her voice dropping a little, "I think we have something to talk about." I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. That first meeting turned into a 4-hour strategy session. Evelyn was brilliant. She was like a surgeon, methodically dissecting the past 40 years of my life and Robert's business. She explained that if they never officially dissolved my share, my 10% would likely carry over through all the restructurings. My little 50 shares in S&R Services
businesses, fueled by my father's $5,000, would now represent 10% of Trident Logistics, a company that was privately held, but which she estimated, after a quick look at industry comps, was worth somewhere between $300 and $400 million. My breath hitched. $30 to $40 million? The number Robert and Candace had so carefully hidden from me? My share? My children's inheritance? My father's faith? Multiplied 10,000-fold? Now they're going to fight this, Evelyn warned me. They will say it was an oversight, a clerical error. They will say you abandoned your stake. They will try to bury us in motions. It will be long and it will be ugly. Are you prepared for that? I thought of Robert's cold face during the divorce. I thought of Candace's smug smile in the business magazines. I thought of the 42 years of my life that they had tried to devalue and discard. Ms. Reed, I said, meeting her sharp gaze, I've been preparing for 42 years. I just didn't know it. Over the next 2 months, we worked in secret. Evelyn and her team of forensic accountants started building a case that was nothing short of an ironclad fortress. They dug through dusty county archives and found the original filing of the SNR Services Charter, proving its authenticity. They charted the precise legal path from that small S-corp to the modern Trident Logistics, showing no breaks in the chain of ownership where my shares would have been legally terminated. The accountants began building a valuation model, a report that would show exactly what my 10% was worth, down to the last dollar. My job was to provide the color, the narrative. I gave them every document I had from the basement, every old letter, every photo. I told them the story of my father's investment. I explained my role in the company's lean years. We weren't just building a legal case, we were reclaiming my history. Finally, the day came. We had everything: the authenticated document, the unbroken chain of corporate succession, and a preliminary financial report that made the numbers on the page look like a telephone book. It was time to make our move. But Evelyn advised against a splashy lawsuit. That's what they'd expect, she explained. It would get tied up in court for years. Robert would bleed you dry with legal fees. We're going to do this quietly, surgically. Her plan was devastatingly simple. We weren't going to sue. We were simply going to inform. We drafted a single, simple letter. It was addressed to Robert Gable, CEO, Candace Shaw, COO, and the entire board of directors of Trident Logistics. The letter stated in calm, professional language that her client, Sarah Gable, was the holder of a 10% equity stake in the company as established by the founding charter of its predecessor corporation. It noted that the stake had never been relinquished or acquired, and it concluded with a polite request for full access to all financial records in order for us to perform a complete valuation ahead of a shareholder meeting. Attached to the letter was one thing: a pristine, certified copy of that one piece of yellowed paper from 1994.
We sent the packages via bonded courier on a Friday morning, set to arrive at precisely 10 a.m. One to Trident headquarters, one to Robert and Candace's Malibu beach house, and one to the home of the chairman of the board. I sat with Evelyn in her office, a cup of coffee in my trembling hands, and watched the digital delivery confirmations pop up on her screen. Delivered. 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 The quietest bomb in the world had just been detonated. Now, all we had to do was wait for the fallout. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. For the rest of that Friday, nothing happened. Not a peep. Evelyn told me to go home and try not to think about it. An impossible task, of course. Every time the phone rang, I jumped a foot in the air. I made a pot of tea and stared at it until it was stone cold. I tried to read a book, but I just read the same page over and over again. I was a bundle of nerves, a tightly coiled spring of hope and terror. What if they had a document I didn't know about? What if some legal loophole made my claim worthless? What if he just ignored it? Saturday came and went in a similar state of agonizing silence.
By Sunday afternoon, I was starting to lose my nerve. Maybe this was all a mistake. Maybe I had built this whole thing up in my head, a fantasy of a downtrodden woman who finds a winning lottery ticket. And then, Sunday evening, at 7:42 p.m., my cell phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but it had a California area code. My heart leapt into my throat. Evelyn had coached me for this. Don't answer any calls from unknown numbers. Let everything go through me. Robert will try to get to you directly, to play on your history and your emotions. Don't let him. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message popped up on the screen. It was from Robert. "Sarah, we need to talk. Call me. This is insane." My hands were shaking, but a wave of something cold and powerful washed over me. Insane. That was his word for it. 42 years of my life, my father's precious gift, my children's birthright, and he called it insane? I took a deep breath, took a screenshot of the text, and forwarded it to Evelyn with a simple message. It begins. The storm broke Monday morning. Evelyn called me at 9:05 a.m. "Good morning, Sarah," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Mr. Gable's lead counsel, a Mr. Stratton, just called me. He was, agitated." "Agitated?" I asked, gripping the phone. "Let's just say he used the words frivolous, baseless, and extortion all in the first sentence." I took that as a sign they're terrified. Evelyn chuckled, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a glass. He blustered for about 10 minutes, and I let him. When he was quite finished, I calmly explained that we have a notarized, county-filed document, and that if he considers asserting a legal right to be extortion, he may want to refresh himself on the definition. Then I told him we eagerly await his formal response. The board was spooked. As Evelyn explained, a secret 10% shareholder popping out of the woodwork is a governance nightmare. It raises questions about due diligence, about historical reporting, about Robert's own transparency with his own partners. Suddenly, this wasn't just Robert's problem, it was the company's problem. He was no longer a king in his castle. He was an executive with a massive, undisclosed liability that he had to answer for. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. The formal response from Robert's lawyer came 2 days later. It was a classic tactic: deny, dismiss, and make a nuisance value offer to get it away. They claimed the document was a forgotten relic from a dissolved corporation and held no legal standing. They argued I had abandoned my shares for not acting on them for 25 years. And then came the offer. $250,000 in exchange for a full release of all claims and a signed non-disclosure agreement. When Evelyn told me the number, I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was sharp and bitter. I said, "He's still trying to buy me off with trinkets. He really doesn't know me at all, does he?" "It's not for you," Evelyn said calmly. "It's for his board. He can go to them and say, 'Look, I tried to be reasonable. I offered her $250,000 to get rid of this frivolous claim, but she's being greedy.' This is all positioning."
We sent our reply the next morning. It was one sentence long. "We reject your client's offer." That's when the second text came from Robert. And a few hours later, a phone call. This time, I knew it was him. His name flashed on the screen. Against Evelyn's advice, I answered it. I needed to hear his voice. I needed to hear the man who had discarded me so easily, now that he was the one on the back foot. "Sarah, what the hell do you think you're doing?" he started. No hello, no preamble. Just the raw, entitled anger I was now so familiar with. I took a breath. "Hello, Robert," I said, my voice as calm and cool as a frozen lake. You'll have to be more specific. Don't play dumb with me. This whole thing with the lawyers, this piece of paper you dug up from 100 years ago, it's nonsense. Is it? I asked. It seems your board of directors doesn't think so. That stopped him. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. He must have just come from a very unpleasant meeting. This is a shakedown, Sarah. After everything I gave you? Everything you gave me? The dam of my composure finally cracked, just a little. Let's be clear, Robert. Everything we had, we built. Me and you. And the $5,000 my father gave me, which you seem to have forgotten about, that's what this is about. You didn't give me anything. You took your half and you tried to steal most of mine. He sputtered, flailing. It's not worth what you think it is. The market's down. There are debts. You have no idea what you're talking about. You never understood the business. It was the same old refrain. The same condescending tone he'd used for years. The same dismissal of my intelligence. But it didn't work anymore. It was like he was firing blanks. That's fine, Robert, I said, finding my center again. If that's the case, then you shouldn't have any problem with our next request. My lawyer will be sending it over this afternoon. What next request? He asked, suspicion lacing his voice. I'm a 10% owner, and as an owner, I am exercising my right to a full, independent forensic audit of the company's books, going back 10 years. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the sound of a man dangling over a cliff, and his grip was slipping. An audit. The one thing a man with secrets can't afford. I imagined him in his gleaming corner office, his tan fading, his expensive suit feeling a little too tight around the collar. I could picture Candace next to him, her perfectly smooth brow furrowed in actual, non-Botoxed canic. They had been operating in the dark for so long, treating the company coffers as their personal piggy bank. I was about to throw the doors open and flood the whole place with sunlight. You can't do that, he finally whispered, his voice raspy. Oh, Robert. And I allowed myself a small, tight smile. You of all people should know, I can, and I will. Have your lawyer call mine. And with that, for the first time in over 40 years, I hung up on him. That phone call was the turning point. It was no longer about them ignoring me or trying to bully me. The threat of a full forensic audit changed the entire game. For Robert and Candace, Trident Logistics wasn't just a business. It had become their private kingdom, funded by corporate money. The Malibu beach house, I soon learned, was leased by a shell corporation owned by Trident. Their luxury cars, the private jet they used for quote-unquote business trips to St. Bart's, and the six-figure salary Candace was drawing for her vague COO title, an audit would expose all of it. Not just to me, but to the board of directors. The board, as Evelyn predicted, acted swiftly. Marcus Storn, the chairman, didn't want the company's dirty laundry aired in a public courtroom. He wanted control. He wanted this problem to go away. His lawyer called Evelyn's office the day after my call with Robert. A formal mediation was proposed. Not between me and Robert, but between my counsel and the board's counsel. They were already beginning to sideline him. This is good, Evelyn explained, pacing her office. This means they believe us. They don't want to risk a court-ordered audit any more than Robert does. Now we get to see what's really behind the curtain. The mediation was set to take place in a neutral location, a sterile conference room in a downtown skyscraper that housed one of the city's top mediation firms. Robert's lawyer would be there, but he would be secondary. This was about me and the company now. Before the meeting, Evelyn and her team of accountants had prepared a preliminary valuation of my stake based on the limited public information they could find.
Their most conservative estimate put my 10% share at a value of $32 million. It was a number so large, it felt unreal. On the day of the mediation, I felt a strange sense of calm. I had spent so many months feeling lost and invisible, like a ghost haunting my own life. But that morning, I felt solid. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple, well-tailored navy blue dress. No flashy jewelry. I wanted to look like what I was, a woman who meant business.
I walked into that conference room with Evelyn at my side. On the other side of a massive mahogany table sat a row of men in dark suits. Marcus Thorne was there himself, a stern-looking man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. Next to him were his lawyers and an accountant from the firm that represented Trident. Robert and his lawyer were seated at the far end of the table, almost as an afterthought. Robert looked awful, his tan sallow under the fluorescent lights, and he had dark circles under his eyes. He wouldn't look at me. He just stared at a yellow legal pad in front of him. Candace was nowhere in sight. The head mediator, a retired judge, laid out the ground rules. This was a confidential negotiation. Everyone was there in good faith to find a resolution. Evelyn began. She didn't grandstand. She didn't make emotional appeals. She simply, methodically laid out our case. She presented the certified incorporation document. She walked them through the unbroken chain of corporate succession. Then she handed them our preliminary valuation report. As Marcus Thorne and his team reviewed the numbers, a heavy silence fell over the room. I watched Robert from across the table. He kept fidgeting with his pen, clicking it open and shut. Click, click, click. A tiny, maddening sound in the quiet room. Finally, Thorne's lawyer, a formidable man named Chen, spoke. "We acknowledge the authenticity of the document," he said, his voice even, "and we acknowledge a potential oversight in the corporate restructuring of 1998. However," he tapped a finger on our valuation report, "we find these numbers to be speculative and, frankly, vastly inflated." Then came their play. They produced their own set of financials, not the official ones, but a managed version. They painted a picture of a company saddled with debt, facing a market downturn with much lower profit margins than anyone believed. According to their numbers, the entire company was only worth about $80 million, making my stake a mere $8 million. It was a lowball, of course, but it was a starting point. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. Evelyn was ready for it. "Thank you for sharing your assessment," she said smoothly, not missing a beat. "Given this vast discrepancy between your valuation and our own, it seems the only prudent course of action is to proceed with the independent audit to clarify the company's true financial standing. We'll have our forensic team on site on Monday." You could feel the temperature in the room drop by 20 degrees. Robert stopped clicking his pen. Marcus Thorne shot Robert a look that was pure ice. An audit was a grenade, and Evelyn had just pulled the pin. "That won't be necessary," Thorne's lawyer cut in quickly. "Perhaps we can find some middle ground." The negotiation went on for 9 hours. 9. We broke for lunch, but I was too wound up to eat. Evelyn and I sat in our private caucus room while the men in suits argued on the other side. They came back with a new offer, $12 million. We countered with our full 32. They moved to 15. We held firm. This wasn't about haggling. It was about principle. It was about what was mine. The sticking point, Evelyn realized, wasn't just about the money. It was Robert's severance. He was being pushed out. The board wanted him gone. The scandal of a secret founder, the near miss of a devastating audit, they had lost all faith in him. But his exit package was tied to the company's valuation. A higher valuation for me meant a higher golden parachute for the man they now despised. It was a messy, tangled knot. Around 6 p.m., the mediator came into our room. "They're stuck," he said. "The board is willing to move significantly, but they don't want to reward Mr. Gable for what they see as gross negligence at best and active concealment at worst." This was it. The moment I hadn't realized I had been waiting for. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about justice. An idea, cold and clear, formed in my mind. I said, "Evelyn, what if we change the terms? What if it's not just about money?" When we went back into the conference room, Evelyn had a new proposal. "My client is prepared to be flexible on the final cash value of her buyout," she announced. The lawyers on the other side leaned forward. Robert looked up, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. "However," she continued, "this flexibility is contingent on 2 non-negotiable conditions." She paused for effect. "Condition 1. My client wants the corporate jet." There was a stunned silence. Robert's lawyer actually sputtered. The corporate jet was a Gulfstream G280, a $25 million asset. It was Robert's pride and joy, the ultimate symbol of his success. "That's absurd," Robert's lawyer blurted. Thorne's lawyer, however, looked intrigued. He was doing the math. Transferring a corporate asset was different than a direct cash payment. It could be spun differently on the balance sheets. "And the second condition?" Chen asked, ignoring Robert's camp.
Evelyn looked straight at Marcus Thorne. "Condition 2. Robert Gable's exit will be announced as a termination for cause, effective immediately. His severance package will be voided in its entirety. The company can state that the reasons are confidential to protect all parties. But there will be no golden parachute. He will walk away with his vested pension, and that is all." The silence that followed was electric. Robert went pale. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, with a raw, pleading desperation. After all these years, he was finally seeing me, not as a ghost, not as a nuisance, but as the woman who held his entire world in her hands. Marcus Thorne leaned back in his chair and looked from me to Robert, a long, calculating stare. I didn't flinch. I just held his gaze. I let him see the steel that 42 years of being underestimated had forged in me. I wasn't a greedy woman. I was a creditor, come to collect a debt that had been overdue for a very long time. Thorne turned to his lawyer Chen and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The war was over. I had won. The final agreement was drawn up in less than an hour. The lawyers shuttled back and forth, ironing out the details with the mediator. The final deal was this. I would receive a cash settlement of $15 million, and the Gulfstream jet, valued at $25 million, but listed as a depreciating corporate asset worth much less on the books, would have its ownership title transferred to a private trust of my creation. In exchange, I would sign a permanent NDA regarding the company's internal financials. Robert's termination for cause, effective immediately and without severance, was a separate internal corporate matter, but it was enshrined in the mediation agreement as a condition of the settlement. When the papers were finally placed in front of us, my hands were perfectly steady. I signed my name, the same way I always have, with a clear and even hand. Then the papers were slid down the long mahogany table to Robert. He looked down at the signature line for a long, long time. The whole room held its breath. This was it, the final unconditional surrender, the abdication of his throne. He picked up the pen, and his hand was shaking so badly he had to steady it with his other one. The bold, confident signature I knew so well, the one that signed every one of our birthday cards and our children's report cards and our mortgage documents, was gone. In its place was a shaky, spiderweb thin scrawl, the signature of a ghost. He didn't say a word. He just pushed the papers back to the center of the table, stood up on unsteady legs, and walked out of the room, leaving his lawyer to gather his things. He never looked at me once.
And just like that, after 42 years, the business of my marriage was finally concluded. 2 weeks later, I stood on the tarmac of a private airfield just outside of Chicago. A sleek white and silver Gulfstream jet was parked in front of me, gleaming in the afternoon sun. My jet. The flight crew had it delivered as per the terms of the agreement. It was the ultimate irony. Robert had always used it to flaunt his success, to feel like a big shot. He'd fly to meetings in it, take Candace to the Caribbean in it. To him, it was a symbol of power and freedom. I walked up the stairs and stepped inside. It smelled of rich leather and Robert's cologne. The cabin was all polished wood and cream-colored upholstery. There was a little bar stocked with his favorite single malt scotch. For a moment, I felt a pang of something. Not sadness, just a dizzying sense of how far we had come from that tiny walk-up apartment and our dreams fueled by cheap champagne. My kids, Michael and Jessica, stood in the doorway behind me, looking around in awe. "Mom, what are you going to do with it?" Jessica asked. I turned and looked at the beautiful, ridiculously opulent plane, and then I started to laugh. Not a small chuckle, but a real deep belly laugh, the kind I hadn't had in years. "What am I going to do with it?" I repeated, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "I'm going to sell it, of course. I'm a 65-year-old woman, not a rock star. Where would I even park this thing?" I had no interest in owning Robert's toy. The victory was in taking it. Selling the jet was the final act of turning his vanity into my security. A broker had it sold within a month to a tech billionaire from Austin.
And that brings us back to where we started, Malibu. I didn't go there for revenge, not really. I went there to close the final door. Evelyn's team had discovered the house was leased through Trident, a gross misuse of corporate funds that the board was now dealing with. The lease was being terminated. I just felt that the news, that final piece of information, should be delivered in person. So I stood there, in that palace of glass and marble built on my life's work, and watched the realization dawn on Candace's perfectly made-up face. Her hand, holding the wine glass, trembled slightly. I don't understand," she stammered. "Robert's company, what does that have to do with you?" "It was never just Robert's company," I said calmly. "It was our company. I was a 10% founder, a fact he conveniently forgot to mention when he liquidated my life to fund, well, all this." I gestured around the ridiculously grand kitchen. I saw the sequence of emotions play across her face. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, and finally, pure, unadulterated panic. The color drained from her cheeks. The life she thought was hers, the security she thought she had married into, was built on a foundation of lies, and I had just kicked out the supporting walls. "Robert's been removed from the company," I continued, my voice even. "The board terminated him. For cause. I'm afraid the golden parachute he promised you isn't going to open. And this house? The company is terminating the lease. You have 30 days to vacate. I just thought you should hear it from me." She just stared at me, speechless. Her whole world crumbling in the span of a 2-minute conversation. There was no pleasure in it for me. Not really. She was just a casualty of Robert's greed, a pretty, ambitious fool who hitched her wagon to a falling star. She never saw me as a person, only as an obstacle that had been removed, and now she was finally seeing how wrong she had been. Who are you?" she whispered, as if seeing me for the first time. "I told you," I said, turning to walk away. "I'm Sarah, and I'm done here." I walked out of that house and didn't look back. I left her there in her stolen life, a life with a sudden and impending expiration date. The consequences were theirs to live with now. My life? It's quiet, and it's my own. I sold the big suburban house, which was full of too many ghosts. I bought a beautiful condo downtown with a view of the lake. I have a season pass to the symphony, and I've started taking pottery classes, my hands covered in clay and my mind at peace. I set up sizable trusts for Michael and Jessica and for each of my 4 grandchildren. I endowed a scholarship in my father's name at the local community college for students going into the trades. It felt like the perfect way to honor his $5,000 investment in me. Last spring, I finally took that trip we were always supposed to take. I went on a river cruise down the Danube. I saw castles and ancient cities, drank wine with new friends, and I woke up every morning in a new port, filled with a sense of peace I thought I had lost forever. I didn't need a private jet. A comfortable seat on the deck with a good book was all the luxury I ever really wanted. Robert, from what I hear through the grapevine, is living in a rented condo in Arizona. His reputation in the business community is ruined. He's a pariah. Candace left him, of course, once the money dried up. I don't feel anger when I think of him anymore. I mostly feel pity. He got exactly what he wanted, a life that was all his own. He's a lonely, disgraced old man in a stupid red sports car, and I'm a free woman, beholden to no one, with a future that I get to write all by myself. And I have to say, it's a much better story. Thanks for following along with me. It's been quite a ride. Now, I have a question for all of you. What would you do in my place? Let me know in the comments below.
So, another story of my grandmother has end, and be clicking here, you will have when more such stories.